Welcome to Illinois in Focus. I'm Greg Bishop. Coming up, we'll review the week's top stories about how some in Illinois are playing politics in other states ahead of the November election and concerns about migrant crime. I'll then join the Center Square's Dan McCaleb to further discuss those stories and more. That's ahead with Illinois in Focus. I'm Greg Bishop.
Do you know what elected officials in Illinois are doing with your tax dollars? Do you want to make sure that your voice is heard? If so, then you need Blue Room Stream, a live and archived video streaming service that provides access to government meetings and events. With Blue Room Stream, you can watch how your elected officials make decisions, hold them accountable for their actions, and be a more informed citizen. Blue Room Stream is the perfect way to get involved in the democratic process and to make a difference in your community. Subscribe today at blueroomstream.com.
Welcome back to Illinois in Focus. I'm Greg Bishop. Here's some of the top stories from the past week. Former President Donald Trump's plan to deport criminal illegal immigrants could run into a roadblock in Illinois, as Republicans doubt the state would be much of a help because of its sanctuary status. Trump's running mate, Ohio U.S. Senator J.D. Vance, explained during the CBS vice presidential debate a bit about their plan on deportations. Tuesday, he said, first, the border must be secured.
About 1 million of those people have committed some form of crime in addition to crossing the border illegally. I think you start with deportations on those folks.
Illinois Republican State Senator Chapin Rose said regardless of who's elected, there's an unknown number of criminal illegal immigrants in Illinois.
But if ICE never knew they were there, which is the law in Illinois, then that person's going to walk right back out the jail door or the Department of Corrections door at the end of their sentence and right back into our local communities. And that's the problem.
A recent Immigration and Customs Enforcement report indicated that there were more than 435,000 people in the U.S. that have crossed the border over several years with criminal records. Illinois Democrats and government workers' union dues are flowing from the land of Lincoln into presidential battleground states. Jim Talamonte reports.
Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker traveled last weekend to campaign in Arizona.
It is truly a battleground state, and if Democrats win in Arizona, from my perspective, there's almost no way that Republicans can win the presidency.
Then Pritzker traveled to New York on Tuesday for the vice presidential debate. Miley Smith, Senior Director of Labor Policy and staff attorney at the Illinois Policy Institute, says Illinois Democrats promise to invest in swing states.
You know, the problem with that is that some of that Democrat money was taken from union member dues.
Smith said labor unions in Illinois have given more than $17 million to Democrat committees since 2010. Smith said money given to those committees can then be spent in other states. I'm Jim Talamonte.
Coming up for Illinois in Focus, I'll join the Center Square's Dan McCaleb to further discuss those stories and more. This is Illinois in Focus, a production of America's Talking Network. I'm Greg Bishop.
Teacher Lauren Johnson returned all the graded essays but one. He believed that one student was capable of more.
I don't believe taking the middle of the road is your philosophy. This time, write something you really believe.
The student wrote a new one about excellence. Instead of just grading an essay, Mr. Johnson changed a life. I am that student. I became a writer, and I wrote this to thank him.
Thank a teacher and pass it on from passiton.com.
Tired of being in the dark about what happens day to day under the dome in Springfield? Do you want to be more informed in the decision-making process? If so, you need Blue Room Stream, a live and archived video streaming service that provides access to government meetings and events. With Blue Room Stream, you can watch elected officials in action, holding them accountable, and having your say on issues that matter most to you. Blue Room Stream is the perfect way to stay informed about Illinois state government and to be a more engaged citizen. Become a subscriber today at blueroomstream.com.
Welcome back to Illinois in Focus, powered by the Center Square. I'm Dan McCaleb, Chief Content Officer at Franklin News Foundation, publisher of the Center Square Newswire service. We're recording this on Thursday, October 3rd, and we are now just days away from the long-anticipated trial of longtime former Illinois House Speaker Michael Madigan. The judge in the case denied motions this week to dismiss some of the charges against Madigan and to separate co-defendant Michael McClain's trial from Madigan's. Joining me to discuss this is Greg Bishop, Illinois Associate Editor. Greg, you covered Madigan's tenure as Speaker for a number of years before he was forced out in 2021. The day's come. What do you make of it?
It has been a long time coming, especially since the speaker had been the speaker for all but 2 years from 1983 to 2021. I mean, that is one heck of a run, let alone he was in the House for 50 years. But it wasn't just his role as a state representative or as the longtime House Speaker controlling what comes up in the House. It was also his role as the Democratic Party of Illinois' executive director. So he had a nexus of power, not only controlling what happened in the House, but also which Democrats were going to get party dollars for their races every 2 years. So you can imagine that itself, that nexus of power, really lend it to his ability to pull favors, to get things passed, and to march an agenda forward. Now, federal prosecutors say that they investigated for 9 years what they called Madigan Enterprise, revealing that the allegations against the speaker, 22 counts, where he tried to benefit himself and his associates in exchange for favorable legislation to help the state's largest utility, Commonwealth Edison. So we already had the ComEd 4 trial. So yeah, it's been a long time coming, and we fully anticipate to staff the hearing to get out all of the evidence because, Dan, as it was with the ComEd 4 hearing, it was fascinating to see and to hear undercover wiretap recordings, undercover video recordings of these individuals talking about getting do-nothing jobs for their friends from ComEd. For every summer, they would need X number of jobs. So these types of things pretty revealing in how government can be abused.
Yeah, speaking of the evidence, Greg, they expect the trial could last up to 10 weeks. That's a whole lot of evidence, so it will be interesting what new, whether it be wiretap data or whatever that we got to listen to for the ComEd 4 trial last year, what new evidence they present. Let's talk about the motions that were denied here this week. McClain and his attorneys wanted to separate his trial from Madigan's. They're going to stand on trial together beginning next week because the judge denied that motion, but he wanted to separate the trial because they expect Madigan and Madigan's attorneys to blame McClain for essentially the corruption. Judge said no, not going to happen. That's only a theory. At this point, they're going to stand trial together. What do you make of that?
Yeah, and listen, I mean, the ComEd 4 trial, McClain was a major role in all of that. A lot of the evidence wasn't solely about McClain, but he was featured in quite a bit of it, from phone calls to, conversations on video at a restaurant where he's talking about deals, and setting up these do-nothing jobs and talking about our friend, which was a reference to Madigan. He'd call people up and, say things like, our friend wouldn't like that, or our friend is more favorable on this thing or that thing. And even the conversations that weren't necessarily about jobs, but about the political inner workings, that were revealed during the ComEd 4 trial, showing that, McClain really acted as almost like this middleman, between Madigan and, those who were making decisions for ComEd. So clearly McClain is central to this, just as central as Madigan. And I think the judge saw that and said, well, we've got to have this all together here. But some of the other things that, Madigan has tried to get the judge to agree with, the judge just hasn't agreed with, including bringing in a political professor who understands the Chicago political machine. While he's going to be allowed to testify, he'll have to narrow his testimony a bit. But there's also just been a lot of publicity heading up to this, and we fully anticipate a lot of fireworks in that courtroom as Madigan will be there, McClain will be there, the federal prosecutors will be there with all of those receipts.
That's right. Now, Madigan is 82 years old now, Greg. If he's convicted and sentenced to time in prison, that could be the rest of his life. Is his age any consideration here?
Yeah, if there was a conviction, again, it's possibly going to be a 10-week sentence. So, here we are. We've got 30 days until the November election. The verdict, whichever way it goes, is going to come out afterwards. So I imagine that if the verdict comes back guilty, you'd have a sentencing phase. There could be, the sentencing is going to be postponed pending an appeal. So I imagine that there's going to be a lot of different ways that Madigan may try to extend his freedom, so to speak. But if any indication is that the evidence in the ComEd 4 trial was as damning as it was, and if we see similar types of evidence, I imagine a jury is going to hear that with wide eyes open.
And as you mentioned, Greg, the Center Square will be in the courthouse covering the trial. 10 weeks, that's a long time. We'll see if it actually goes that way. But listeners can follow all of our coverage at thecentersquare.com. Greg, moving on. On the debate stage Tuesday night, vice presidential candidate and Ohio U.S. Senator J.D. Vance spelled out his and former President Donald Trump's plan to deport thousands of foreign nationals who are in the country illegally and have violent criminal records. Republicans in Illinois, though, worry that because of the state's sanctuary status, Illinois might not be much help if they're elected. Tell us about it.
Yeah, this is kind of fascinating. Former President Donald Trump has said for months now that he's going to have the, quote, largest mass deportation operation in U.S. history. He then refined that a bit to say that they're going to go after the violent, criminal, illegal aliens in this country. And then you had last week, ICE officials releasing numbers on how many of those who've crossed the border have criminal records. Dan, it's tens of thousands of individuals who've crossed over who have not just criminal records, violent criminal records. So one thing that some Senate Republicans here in the state of Illinois did this week was they held a news conference, and they highlighted these numbers, and they said there's no way of knowing how many of those are in Illinois. Keep in mind, Dan, the state of Illinois has received, 45 plus thousand non-citizen migrants just since August of 2022. And it's cost taxpayers $1 billion plus, estimated to cost another $1 billion for housing, food, education, legal assistance, and even, taxpayer subsidized health care. That's being funded. So you've got all of these non-citizens, but how many are criminal, illegal aliens with criminal records? That's something that the Senate Republicans said they don't have an answer to, and they don't even think they can get an answer to. And it's a major driver of why they want to eliminate the Trust Act in Illinois. The Trust Act was actually enacted by former Governor Bruce Rauner, and then it was enhanced with a different law that Governor J.B. Pritzker signed, essentially saying that non-citizens in this state, Immigration Customs Enforcement cannot get cooperation from state and local police. So if state and local police pull somebody over, they're by law not even allowed to ask about somebody's immigration status. And the Republicans say that this is dangerous, especially with the numbers that we've seen reported by ICE of non-citizens in this country with criminal histories, and asked about, if Trump gets elected, what's Illinois' role going to be? Some of the Republicans just said it's going to be status quo unless Illinois law changes to get rid of that provision that says local and state police cannot cooperate with federal immigration officials.
Of course, we've been covering the presidential race at thecentersquare.com, and we'll continue to provide regular coverage heading into the election, which is now just about a month away. Early voting is already underway in most of Illinois. Greg, moving on, there were some developments this week in the judge's ruling striking down Illinois' ban of concealed carry on public transit. There was a hearing related to after an apology that was issued by the Illinois Attorney General's office. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so this deals with the ban on individuals with concealed carry permits being prohibited from carrying their concealed firearm on mass transit throughout Illinois. So in September, federal judge Ian Johnston in the Northern District, he ruled that the prohibition violates the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. But his ruling only impacted 4 plaintiffs. So it wasn't a broad ruling for all concealed carry license holders. It was a ruling just for those 4 plaintiffs. And when the state filed a motion to stay his ruling or to hold his ruling in place and not make it effective, that's what a stay means in legal terms. When they made that motion to stay, they said that 3 days after the judge's ruling, there was a quadruple homicide on the CTA Blue Line where 4 sleeping homeless people were murdered. And when the judge saw this in the motion, he demanded a hearing to have these attorneys answer why they made that statement, to answer if they did any inquiry into if this alleged assailant had a concealed carry license and was carrying concealed for protection. And the state replied before Wednesday's hearing saying that they apologize if that's how it was interpreted. Cook County also replying, saying that they did not interpret that sentence that way. But during the hearing Wednesday, Dan, it was a verbal lashing. The judge came in demanding answers, asking if they did any inquiry about the concealed carry license status of the assailants in this quadruple homicide, saying that the way he reads the sentence indicates that his ruling is the reason these 4 people were murdered. And the state attorney and the Cook County attorney sat there silent most of the time, only answering correct, yes, Your Honor, no, Your Honor. They tried to say that they were attempting to portray the issue of more people carrying firearms leads to more similar incidents, but the judge wasn't having that. The judge said that his ruling only impacts these 4 plaintiffs who are concealed carry license holders. And he also demanded answers as to any instances the attorneys found of licensed concealed carry holders, people who have to go to Illinois State Police, provide background checks, get vetted. They do, investigations on these individuals. They can't have any criminal history. They can't have any psychological issues, and a whole host of other requirements that people have to get through Illinois State Police. So the judge demanded to know if the defense in this case, the state of Illinois and Cook County, whether they had any instances of people in Illinois with concealed carry licenses murdering people on public transit, or let alone even being arrested for having a firearm on public transit. Of course, the state's attorneys, they couldn't answer the question. They didn't have that data. Ultimately, Wednesday, the judge said your motion is devoid of facts, is devoid of critical information, and he denied their motion to stay his ruling that impacts these 4 plaintiffs. And he did have an option, though, Dan. He could have sanctioned these attorneys, but he chose not to. He said that attorneys are to be held to a higher standard, but he ended the hearing saying this isn't Facebook. This is already a heated issue, and making spurious statements like that, connecting a judge's court order about legal law-abiding concealed carry holders being able to carry their firearms at public transit for these 4 individuals that were plaintiffs. He said that equating that to people getting shot is harmful and doesn't help the conversation. So he said, this isn't a Facebook post. Do better. Your motion to stay is denied. Have a good day. So as of right now, the case is pending appeal, and likely we'll hear a lot more about this case when it gets to the 7th Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals.
Yeah, I wish I could have been in the courtroom for that one, Greg. It sounds like it was.
I tell you, I've been in some of these hearings, and this was a telephonic hearing, just listening over the phone. But
okay,
the judge definitely gave the attorneys, like I said, a verbal lashing.
And as you said, the state and the city have appealed the judge's ruling, so the legal process is not over here.
Not by any stretch.
Continuing battle in over the Chinese Communist Party connected Goshen battery plant. They want to build a $2 billion factory in Manteno, but a number of Manteno residents are against it for a number of reasons, particularly environmental and health reasons. What's the update this week, Greg?
So a judge did dismiss a motion from Goshen to get rid of the case, but also dismissed the plaintiff's case without prejudice. And what that means is the plaintiffs can bring back the case after they refine it a bit. So the attorney, speaking with our colleague for the story at the Center Square, said that they do plan to bring back the environmental claims that they have, saying that it could have harmful chemicals at the plants that the area is not zoned for, could get into the water supply, let alone the fire hazards that area fire departments may not be able to handle if there was to be some kind of malfunction and a fire developed from that. So they're going to refile that case. They're also still considering whether or not they make the issue of Goshen being linked to the Chinese Communist Party as part of their filing. The original filing that the plaintiffs, the citizens of Manteno, had did indicate that they had strong concerns of the CCP connection here. But the judge said that there wasn't enough there as far as evidentiary. So what they ended up doing is after they initially filed this a while back, there's been a lot of documentation now, even with Congressman Darren LaHood telling federal officials of the connections they have to the slave wages they pay over in China, the abuse of the Uyghur Muslim population in China. So there's clearly still some strong concerns, and we'll hear a lot more about this with public hearings that LaHood and others are holding, because it's not just in Illinois and Kankakee County, Dan, that Goshen's looking to set something up. They're looking to set something up in other states as well, and similar concerns from area residents, both on the environmental side, but also on the side of this company being linked to the Chinese Communist Party.
Yeah, specifically in Michigan, we've been writing for a few years about local residents and others trying to bar Goshen from building a similar plant there. The Illinois Manteno plans are a little fresher, a little newer, and of course Governor Pritzker does support allowing Goshen to build in Manteno. He's given hundreds of millions of dollars in tax breaks, or at least promised hundreds of millions of dollars in tax breaks to the outlet. Greg, time for one last story, and that is ongoing concerns over the closing of Stateville Correctional Center. Inmates are being removed. A number of Republican lawmakers are concerned that it'll never be rebuilt. Tell us more about that.
It's not just Republicans, Democrats as well, concerned about this plan, something that's estimated to cost $900 million to demolish and replace not just Stateville, but also Logan Correctional Facility in Lincoln, Illinois, here in central Illinois. And not just the timeline of all of this, but the cost and whether or not they're even going to build these things to replace them. So the cost, again, $900 million. We don't have a definitive timeline, but for the Stateville Center, the governor talked about how there's only a couple of dozen inmates left in medical units at Stateville because they're complying with a federal court order to remove inmates from Stateville to other prisons because of the conditions at Stateville. So there was a federal lawsuit a while back. Inmates and their families suing about the conditions at Stateville. Federal judge said, yeah, you got to get them out. So some state lawmakers saying that that's convenient for the governor to move forward with his plan. But State Senator Don DeWitt in particular was worried that with the decline in Illinois' prison population, there may not be a need for any new prisons. So he's worried that the jobs that are there for Stateville, you've got the families from the northern part of the state that may want to visit their family members that are inmates at these prisons. There's a whole host of concerns from labor to safety and beyond that we're going to continue to hear about because this plan to replace Stateville and Logan expected to take up to 5 years.
Wow. Well, Greg, thank you for joining us today. Listeners can keep up with all of the stories we talked about and more at thecentersquare.com.